I'm Zoe, and today we are resizing clothing with eyelets and grommets, which I always thought were the same thing, but I guess they're not. The first tutorial makes clothing smaller by cinching in some fabric without really cutting it, and the second tutorial can make clothing larger or smaller by opening up or cutting out some fabric. For the first one, I'm using a thrifted men's tank top, and this tutorial is the same idea as my corset dress tutorial, but with eyelets to protect the lace holes. So put your clothing on inside out and pull the fabric together in the area you want the laces until it fits tight, and then mark where your fingers are holding the fabric. Also, I suggest marking the center of the area you want the laces, or just the general size of the lacing you want, which I did not do. Now lay the clothing down still inside out and subscribe to my channel. I tried drafting out where to put the eyelets because I only had around 20 of them. I'm doing 4 columns and 5 rows, so I need 4 eyelets per row, and if that is confusing, do not worry because I was way overthinking it. Then my battery died, giving me a second to step back and realize that I could simplify this. So I changed the battery and then I laid down on the floor to mark my approximate waist as a middle point. So ignore the white marks, I switched to yellow. Starting over the easy way, draw parallel lines down the clothing at least an inch outside of your original finger marks. The wider apart you make these lines, the wider the lace section will be in the end. Then I just centered my set of eyelet spots using my waist mark, and I spaced them 2 inches apart lengthwise and an inch apart inwards for the second column on both sides. Alrighty, for the eyelets, I'm doing them by hand again. So I grabbed a piece of wood and a hammer, and I would like to mention that I only hammered my thumb about 5 times with 20 eyelets and 24 grommets, so statistically I think I did okay. I tried using a fabric hole punch first to make the holes, but I abandoned that quickly. So you make a small hole, like a super small hole, then you push the eyelet up through from the bottom because it's inside out. Put the backing on and then hammer it flat using an eyelet tool. Now mine came with the hardware. After the first eyelet, I switched from wood to a clipboard because it was surprisingly better. I continued adding the eyelets, but I realized they really aren't great for stretchy fabrics, and my sister-in-law had an excellent suggestion of adding like a fabric fusing sheet, like for quilting, on the inside to reinforce the fabric beforehand to prevent the stretching of the eyelet holes, which is something that worked well for me in the past in my cutouts video, so I will definitely be trying that next time. Or even just adding some glue. Also, I had to add 1 different colored eyelet on each side because I miscounted, but the inner columns of eyelets won't show at the end, so it's fine. Then turn your clothing back inside in because we are almost done. You could cut a strip of fabric from the bottom of the shirt to make laces, but I wanted to use a bright color, so I laid out some fabric ribbon I had in a few colors. I chose this shiny yellow one, and then I measured out a piece about twice as long as the shirt, but I could have gone even longer. And I melted the ends with a lighter to stop fraying, but glue works too. I laced each end of ribbon in through the inner column of eyelets and then out the matching outer column. It is up to you whether you start at the top or the bottom. You could even use 2 laces and have them meet in the middle so that the bow is in the center. Other than that, I just laced it like a shoe. Then you just put it on and adjust and tighten the laces and tie it in a little bow. I could not see what I was doing in this scene, so I fixed it in the mirror after. And that's the first one. Now for the open laces I did on this thrifted dress. This tutorial is similar to my lace up tops video, but with grommets to protect the lace holes and kind of hem the fabric. And they look pretty. So put your clothing on inside out, and if making clothes larger, mark out where you want the laces to let out the fabric, and if you're making your clothes a similar size or smaller, mark out the maximum amount of fabric you are willing to lose where you're adding the laces. I wanted to make the waist tighter but keep the shape everywhere else, so I curved my line inwards at the waist and then I just followed the line of the dress for the rest. Keep in mind though that the curvier you make this line, the harder it will be to lay the fabric flat while installing the grommets. Lay your clothing down flat, still inside out. If making your clothing bigger, I would suggest opening the seam instead of cutting it in the section you want the laces. But if you do that, you won't have laces from the clothing and you'll need to use something else like a ribbon. To make the laces, I'm going to cut about a 1/2 inch strip off the side of the dress, including the seam, but I'm going to make sure I leave at least 1 inch of excess fabric around my markings because I'm going to fold it over later. After cutting the strip of fabric, I opened up its seam with a seam ripper to make 2 strips, and then I stretched them, and that will be the laces. So then I started the lengthy process of folding the fabric over at my marked line and then pinning it in place. Clothespins or flat hair clips work to hold the fabric if you don't have pins. This was difficult because I curved the line in, preventing the fabric from laying flat when folded. I did cut the seam open a little more at the top, and that helped. So with the edge of the fabric folded over, my idea was to create somewhat of a hem using the grommets to fasten the layers of fabric together instead of thread. Installing the grommets is just like the eyelets, just cut a small hole, squeeze the grommet through, put the backing on, and hammer it down. But I had to cut the hole through 2 layers of fabric. Also, I had a really hard time using the tool that they came with, so I had to just hammer down the first couple before I figured out a better way. After the top eyelet, I looked at the spacing. I had enough grommets for 12 down each side if I alternated gold and silver, and I used a ruler to count out where I should put them. 2 inches apart was looking promising, but I made sure to measure as I went to account for the size of the grommets because they were 8mm and I didn't want to deal with that. So continuing to struggle with installing the grommets, I grabbed some pliers to get the bending of the metal started, and after doing that, the tool worked quite well. Also, the spacing ended up perfect. For the other side, I used my new grommet hemmed edge to trace the same shape lightly onto the fabric on the other side. Then I flipped it over, pinned it in the same way, and installed the grommets in the same way, but I switched the silver and gold so they would alternate. It was very loud in my house for a while. Also, if you are using sewing pins, double check to make sure you remove them all and also that they are all accounted for. After all the 24 grommets were installed, I trimmed off some of the excess fabric behind the grommets on the inside, and I'm glad I did because I used it later. Then I turned the dress back inside in, tied my 2 strips of fabric together from earlier, and then I slipped that knot inside the clothing and pulled both ends up through the top grommets, one on either side. Then I just laced it downwards like a regular shoelace, but I did the rest with the laces over top rather than underneath. I also think a bar lacing technique or even something more complicated would look really nice, but you would need really long laces because when I got to the bottom, I barely had enough laces to tie it. So I ended up adding those strips of excess fabric from earlier to the ends to make them longer so I could make a nice bow. Okay, when I put it on, it was easy for me to adjust the lacing because I could see it this time, and it turned out really well. I was getting a little worried that the fabric wouldn't lay properly on my body while I was installing the grommets, but I'm glad I just trusted the process because it actually worked. While editing, I do notice the fabric pucker a little bit at the top of the laces, so I will fix that by opening up that seam I cut earlier just a little bit more on the inside until there's no more tension there. And that's everything. Let me know your thoughts or if you have any questions. And thank you so much for watching. As always, I appreciate every single one of you.